Hello, welcome back to the Poetry Path, and thanks for joining me this week. For the last few weeks, we've explored our memories and our imaginations, and we've talked about the ways that poets choose carefully their words and decide how to arrange them on the page. Today, I'm going to ask you to use your imagination and all the tools we've developed so far to step outside yourself and think about what the world looks and feels like from other people's point of view. Maybe even from the points of view of people who are very different from you. This week's lesson requires a great deal of empathy, the ability to step into someone else's shoes. Speaking of shoes, here's an example of the kind of poem I have in mind. It's called Guttermans Clogs, and it was published in this poetry collection called Pennsylvania Furnace by the poet Julie Swarstad Johnson. While I read it, I'd like you to ask yourself, who is this person who is speaking the poem? How can you tell? And what do you learn about this person from the poem? Guttermans Clogs. The shoemaker carved brick-thick soles from hardwood, then tented umber leather above the front to hold my boots fast. With the straps hooked behind my heels, I tread the casting-house floor, heat from the spilling iron on my feet like a warm stone tucked into my bed. Beneath the clogs, sand parted in rows to receive the scorch of metal pooling silver bright, while I sweat and steam like a draft horse in the burning air. Last week, I dreamt I walked the casting floor alone, clad in bare feet. The molten iron flowed out, cool as French Creek in summer, and I waded into that freshness, slipping beneath the timp stone into the filled crucible to float there on light that lifted me from this solid ground. So who is this person speaking in the poem Guttermans Clogs, and how can you tell? Although the poet herself, I happen to know, is a young woman who lives in Arizona, we know right away that the I in this poem isn't her. Because this I is someone who treads the casting house floor, who wears these special shoes to do an unusual sounding job, who sweats while molten metal pools. The title of the poem gives us a clue. This is a gutterman speaking, and because the poem appears in a collection of poetry that documents the 19th century iron industry in Pennsylvania, we understand that this poem is spoken from the perspective of the gutterman, the worker who worked the furnace as liquid iron came spilling out. Can you imagine the kinds of research Julie Swarstad Johnson must have done to learn about the special words and images and even the possible feelings of a 19th century ironworker? She has not only stepped into the gutterman's shoes, but into his voice. She has considered his life and his experiences long enough that she has been able to take that imaginative and empathetic leap. This kind of poem, a poem in which the poet speaks in the voice of a person other than herself, is called a persona poem. When you write a persona poem, you do as much work as you can to imagine what it might feel like to be this other person you're writing from the perspective of, and then you write in their voice. Persona comes from the Latin word for mask. We're putting on the mask of the poem to see through somebody else's eyes. So today, I'd like you to try writing a persona poem. Can you imagine life from the perspective of the person in this image that I'll show you on the screen now? This is a photograph of Honduran immigrant Maria Celeste Castro and her daughter Melita Patricio, age 2, waiting as a U.S. Border Patrol vehicle arrives to transport their group to a processing center after they crossed the Rio Grande into Texas on July 24, 2014 in Mission, Texas. That information in and of itself might get you thinking about what it feels like to be this person at this moment, and maybe your imagination is already worrying. But here are some further questions to get you thinking. So use your imagination to think about these questions. Where is this person? How would you describe the landscape? What can this person see, hear, smell? How do you think the air tastes? What's around this person and what's happening around them? What does it feel like to be her right now? What does this person love? What makes her mad? What is her most treasured possession and her favorite food and her favorite song or color and place? What do you think she wishes she had right now? And what question would she like to ask? You'll have to use your imagination to answer many of these questions, although you might want to do some research too. How can you learn as much as possible about what it might be like to be this person? I'll bring the photograph back to the screen in a moment so you can study it, but first, write these questions on the screen down. Pause here to do that and come back once you're ready. Now that you have these questions written down, and feel free to add some questions of your own as well, I'm going to show you the photograph again. I'd like you to spend as long as you need studying the image and trying to step into this other person's shoes. Remember too, as you brainstorm and answer the questions I've posed, to draw on all the tools we've learned so far. Use vivid words to describe what this person might be seeing, smelling, tasting, and make comparisons to bring your imaginings to life. Please pause the screen here as long as you need to. Use your imagination to brainstorm and step into this person's shoes. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed reaching your imaginative empathy across the continent to consider this person's experiences. Now it's time to shape your notes and brainstorms into a poem. Here's what I'd like you to do. Use the following phrases to begin the sentences of your persona poem, and use the notes you took while studying the photograph to complete these sentences. You can use any or all of these phrases in any order. Just follow your sensibility. Remember that you are speaking not as yourself, but from the perspective of the person in the photo. You are writing a persona poem. You are stepping into this other person's voice. Pause the screen here for as long as you need to write your poem. I hope you enjoyed working on your persona poem today, putting on the mask of somebody else's experience and seeing through their eyes. If you haven't yet given your poem a title, consider that the titles of persona poems often give you a hint of who is speaking, like the poem Guttermans Clogs that we read earlier. I'd like to end class today by sharing with you a poem that some of my students at Centercrest Nursing Home in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, wrote in response to this same photograph that you've just studied. They called their poem New to the Country, the Refugee's Song. New to the Country, the Refugee's Song, by Linda Kennedy, Lou Henninger, Alan Bowers, Laura Johnson, Lorena Studer, Jim McKinley, Keith Dowdy, and Claire Traynor. I hear tires on the sand, and the sound of the siren, and the voices of the Border Patrol guards barking in a language I don't understand. I want to know what happens now with my child. Will she always be holding my hand? When the night air grows cold, will this country wrap her in a warm quilt? How will she be received? I forget what my favorite jeans and jacket felt like, my shoes or my bare feet. The dry ground goes on forever. I keep the memory of scrub pines alive, and we have walked forever. The dry ground bleeds into the river. The dry heat keeps urging us on. After we crossed the river, we were given clean charity clothes and shoes without laces. The mantle of sky over us is like a lake. It's big, vast, and it moves like it's getting ready to rain. Last week, I dreamt that we had arrived, but I can't imagine what this country will be like. I keep calling out to my bruja to intervene, but all that comes is the smell of mesquite burning, refried beans cooking. There is a feeling of walking out of a cell, but also a jolt of red up my spine. Do they want us? What are we facing? Thank you for joining me this week. Next week, we'll try writing another persona poem from the perspective of another American who might be similar or different from you. Until then, take care and keep writing.